You know, chocolate really is a comfort to us in our rushed, crushed, stress-filled lifestyles. It helps refresh our worn-out bodies. It helps soothe our frayed nerves, and it calms our fears. But I'd like to shift gears just a minute now and get a little bit more serious tonight and talk about a different kind of comfort for our fears. The type of comfort we can't get from Godiva, but only from Papa God. When I was fixing to write my book, Fear, Faith, and a Fistful of Chocolate, I did a survey. I conducted a survey of 500 women between the ages of 18 and 80 to find out what were their most severe worries. What were the fears that they struggle with on an everyday basis? And I'm going to share those with you now, David Letterman style, from number 10 up to number 1. The 10 top fears that women have. And as I'm going over these, think about yourself. Take a moment and just think about what are your fears that you struggle with on a daily basis. The number 10 top fear of women was being judged unfairly. Number 9, specific critters like snakes, roaches, and rats. Number 8, rejection. Number 7, dependency on others. Number 6, loneliness. Number 5, and this is my biggest one right here, the unknown or the what ifs. That's my hamster wheel that I get on in the middle of the night and I start thinking, what if such and such happens? Then that's going to happen. And then, oh no, and then that's probably going to happen. And I just create all this big, horrible things that don't really exist. And I do what the Bible says not to do. I borrow troubles from tomorrow when today's got enough of its own. Well, that's my big whammy. And then number 4, changes associated with old age. Number 3 is fear of failure. Number 2, debilitating disease or terminal illness. And number 1 was so far head and shoulders above all the rest of them, it was more than doubled what the number 2 and below were. Think a minute what you think the number 1 fear of women might be. Any guesses? That would probably be in my book. Yes, chocolate. No, seriously, the number 1 fear of women was loss of the loved one, meaning a spouse, a child, or a parent. And that loss wasn't just death. They were talking about the separation, the severed relationship that could occur, say, with a prodigal child or with a separation or divorce, not just death. And I think many of us can understand that because we suffer these fears too. Does this sound like... It sounds like a little piggy going... Is it my earring? It's my earring that I lost earlier and I've been looking everywhere. Let me just take that little puppy right out of there. Isn't that a hoot? Okay. Everybody take out one earring in solidarity. Are you ready? Okay. Okay. Back to serious for just a minute. How many of you here feel that at least some of your adult behaviors have been shaped by fears that followed you from childhood? Can you identify some? You know, sometimes we're not even aware of them. I want to tell you a story tonight about a friend of mine. She's the best example I can think of someone who was controlled by her fears that started in childhood. And she really was totally controlled by these until the Lord helped her to put them in submission. And she's a wonderful story. But my friend's name is Eddie. And when you start out life with being a girl named Eddie, you've got problems to start with, right? Okay. She's a sweetie. She was raised in the 60s in inner city Newark. And this was a time when there was a lot of terrible unrest going on, a lot of race riots and violence and scary things happening in the streets. In fact, Eddie and her sisters carried chains for protection, and they got into the habit of in the morning before they'd go to school, they'd sprinkle baby powder on the stoop of their apartment, so when they got home, they could look at the footprints and see if there'd been intruders while they were gone. Well, Eddie was the fifth of 7 children, and so she was pretty much raised by her older brothers and sisters because both of her parents had multiple jobs to try to keep ends together. Well, Eddie's older brothers had the bad habit of chasing her around the house with dead butterflies. And they would say, if I touch you with this butterfly, you're going to turn into a caterpillar. And you know how brothers do. And she believed that. She took that to heart. So she was terrified of butterflies. And, yeah, true. And then, unfortunately, vermin are an unfortunate part, a fact of tenant life in the big cities. And so her building was full of rats. Big rats. And Eddie would lie in her bed at night and just be terrified, laying there, hearing the scurrying of rats and the snap of the rat traps when they would grab the rats. And she would just picture these nasty, disgusting rats crawling up the fringe on the bottom of her bedspread. And so, to this day, she will not have a bedspread or any tassels or anything that goes to the floor. She will only have a comforter that goes halfway down. Still to this day. And the other thing her mom and dad did was, for protection of their children, was to tell them that if they were to step foot in any kind of standing water above their knees, they were going to drown. No doubt about it. So Eddie then never learned to swim and was terrified of water, standing water. So, fast forward, and she had a lot of other fears that came out, and I have them she got a whole chapter in my book, Fear, Faith, and Physical Child. But I'm not going to go into all that here for the sake of time, just those few. Well, fast forward 4 decades, and Eddie, by the grace of God, has finished school. She got a scholarship to college, academic scholarship, went to college, met a wonderful young man named Don, got married, raised 2 fine sons. They had a nice house in the suburbs, good jobs. And, Eddie looked, from all practical purposes, from the outside, like she had it all together. She had everything. But, these fears were still tormenting her. And then when the boys went off to college, Don's business transferred him down to Tampa area, to Brandon. And so he came first. He left Eddie up there to pack and get everything ready to sell the house. He came down and he started looking around for a house. And he said, here we are in paradise, Brandon. Everybody wants to live in Brandon. And he said, all our relatives are from New Jersey. Not paradise, excuse me if you're from New Jersey, are going to move down here. They're going to come down, visit, and then we need to have a pool. So let's get a nice Florida house. So he put down money on a pool home. And then a few weeks later, Eddie came down, and the first thing she did when Dawn drove her up in the driveway, she got out of the car, and what does she see? She sees, you've seen them. She's seen hundreds, it felt like, of these squirmy, squiggly lizards, brown lizards everywhere, squirming all over and she was like, and it immediately took her back to those rats, immediately. And Don saying, oh, they're harmless. He reaches down, he grabs one by the tail. Well, you know what happens when you grab a lizard tail. There's the tail, and there goes the little lizard. See, it's nothing to worry about. It's just like, ow! And then she starts getting dive bombed by these beautiful, gigantic monarch butterflies. And she's like going, ah, ah, ah. And she runs into the house and looks out in the backyard, and there's an 8-foot death hole in the backyard. And so Eddie was like, what am I going to do here? So she didn't have a job at first, that first year she was here. So when Dawn went off to work, she would shut all the blinds, shut the glass doors, shut everything up, and lock herself in that house. She became a prisoner in her own home. She was terrified to go out. If she had to go somewhere, she would go into the garage with the garage door shut, get in the car real fast, hit the garage door, go out, go where she needed to come back, shut the garage door, run in the house, and, And when Don was home and he wanted to feel like he lived in Florida and open things up, she would stand with a broom in the doorway and this is gross, but a pot of boiling water. That was what she did with the lizards. Yeah. So she just couldn't live that way. About 2 weeks after that, being a prisoner, she heard about a Bible study in our neighborhood. And so I lived like a block around from her. So she started coming to this Bible study. In the first few weeks, she was very quiet. And she didn't say much. And then finally, she got to where she trusted us a little bit. If you guys don't have a neighborhood Bible study, awesome. They're so wonderful. I encourage you to consider starting one. We started one about 3 years ago, one other neighbor and I who were Christians. And we have about 14, 15 girls that come regularly now. And we're from all different denominations. We're from all different walks and levels of our faith. And we encourage each other and love each other. And we're right there because we're neighbors. And we live life together. We're doing it together. And we're all growing in our faith. So Eddie became a part of this group. And after a while, she started to trust us. And she opened up. And she started telling us about these fears, these horrible fears that were controlling her life. Now, we began to pray with her, and I'm going to skip off of her story for just a minute and come back to it. But it's true. Our fears can keep us stretched tighter than size 8 jeans over a size 12 tushy, and you know it. Fear itself isn't really a bad thing. Papa God gave us the emotion of fear for good reason. When it was used as it is intended, it serves a useful purpose. It motivates us. It moves us forward. It keeps us from making mistakes. Sometimes fear even saves us from ourselves. I mean, how many times in school would we have just not gone to class because we didn't feel like it without that disciplining fear of failure hanging over our heads? Or how rotund might we become without that fear of regaining those 10 pounds we worked so hard to lose? Or why else would we faithfully squash our bosom buddies flat with mammograms without the possibility of that frightening C word invading our bodies? Healthy fear is meant for our good, but it's when fear becomes controlling that it debilitates. When fear coils its tentacles around our hearts and squeezes the life right out of us. When it grows from an emotion to a paradigm. When it alters our course from the splendid, bold, confident women that Papa God intended for us to be and make us settle for a wimpy, whiny imitation. I mean, really, girlfriend, who wants to be olive oil when you can be Xena, the warrior princess? Our fears tend to spotlight what matters to us most, those hidden corners of our life in which we trust Papa God the least. And those are the spots we need to work on.